What's up, everybody? It's Izzy, and in this video I want to talk about the number one reason that people underperform at meets. And to be clear here, I'm talking about people not being able to hit numbers that their training indicates that they should have hit. So I'm not talking about people who go 1 for 3 on a lift because, they just picked horrible attempts that their training didn't even indicate they could hit anyway. So I'm not talking about ego lifting here, and I'm also not talking about incorrect peaking strategies. Because this obviously does happen, but to me it's not the number one reason. So you can definitely do something like, say, there are certain peaking strategies where you purposely overreach and then you taper so that you have a little boost in performance on meet day. And sometimes people, if they're unfamiliar with their own body or just they push things too hard, they can mess up the timing of the peak and peak early or peak too late. And that can lead to, bad results on game day. And there's other reasons too, right? Like cutting water weight and things of that nature. But I want to talk about the most common reason that I personally see why people underperform at meets, and that is because they do not train to the competition standard. They do not uphold the competition standard in their training. And this goes both towards the equipment that they use and the technique that they use. So we can talk first about squats. You have to be aware of what federation that you're going to be competing in. So for most of you with, less than like 900-pound squats, so that's all of you really, the IPF bar that you're going to use, or if you're in the USPA, the squat bar that you're going to use has pretty much no whip with 500, 600 pounds on it. There's going to be almost no whip on those bars at those weights. So if you're using a pool noodle bar at your commercial gym, some chrome bar that's bendy and whippy, and you're getting in the habit of descending super fast to take advantage of the whip, you're going to be in for a bad surprise at the meet when the bar does not whip. The other one, more obvious one, of course, is technique-wise. There's a lot of people who do not squat to convincing depth, and we've all done it. We've all done it, and then lied to themselves about the fact that they are squatting to convincing depth, or saying, I'll fix it at meet day. And while that can work, it will lead you to pick unrealistic numbers at the meet because you're not training to the competition standard. So you're going to have to do things to the competition standard on meet day, and that could result in a potentially serious loss of poundage because you're talking about something that's making the movement easier and not harder, right? Squatting higher makes it easier. So when you have to do something that's harder at the meet, you might have to take off significant poundage if you're skipping out on a range of motion that you don't normally train. So with squat, be honest about the bar that you're using and be honest about going to depth. Bench has very similar issues, but they're just magnified because there's so much more opportunity to cheat on bench, I guess. So in terms of equipment, this is a really big one because on the one end of the spectrum, you have, say, like commercial gym benches that are too short. They're like they're like barely a foot off of the ground when a standard competition bench, might be 17 to 18 inches. And they're not wide enough, and so people get used to a really low bench that makes it much harder. And then actually, though, almost as common in the lifters that I work with, because they tend to be dedicated competitive power lifters, is that I'll get people who compete in the USAPL who use like a fat pad bench, or even more commonly, a really nice Forza standalone bench. And Forzas are taller and a smidge wider than your typical ER or Eleiko combo rack bench. And because of this, because they're taller, even just 1.5 inches or so, you get a better arch and more leg drive. So it makes the range of motion shorter, and you're getting more from your legs without your ass coming off of the bench. And I know a lot of people who can attest to this, but there's plenty of people that can bench 10, 15, 30 pounds more on a good Forza standalone bench versus, your typical ER or Eleiko rack. So you have to be honest about the equipment that you're using here and how it's going to impact your bench training. A high, wide bench is not productive compared to just training on a shittier bench because you are going to have to adjust those numbers down. And likewise, if you're at a commercial gym, there's just nothing you can do about it. Be aware that you'll probably feel better on the bench on meet day, but nothing's for sure because you're going to adapt your technique to the benches that you use every day, and it'll be completely different at the meet. However, let's be honest about what's more common in terms of bench press and why people underperform, and that is they do all sorts of things in their training that isn't to the competition standard. So they have really quick pauses in meets, especially at the USAPL. Or the IPF, you're bound to get some long pause calls, and people don't train for that. They do quick pauses. We've all been guilty of this. I've been guilty of it. and it's not representative of what you're actually going to get at meet day, and because of that, it's going to obviously be harder than what you're used to, which decreases the weight that you could do versus what you were expecting from your training. And another big offender that I've been really guilty of personally, and I'm working on it to this day, is not allowing any butt lift, because a lot of people find that they can, again, lift 5 to 10 more kilos, 10 to 20 more pounds with their butt an inch or two off of the bench. So it's not like a crazy amount of butt lift, but it's just enough to lift more weight. And it's just enough for your ego to be like, oh, I can clean that up in the future, clean that up at the meet, when in reality, no, you can't. So all of a sudden, you get somebody who has their butt an inch off of the bench, or two, not much at all, just barely, with a slightly quick pause, and now you've got something that adds up to benching 25 pounds more than what they could do if they were training closer to the competition standard. And this is how you go into the meet and miss your second attempt, despite your training saying that you should be able to do it, because your training is under different conditions, easier conditions than what is at the meet. And the root cause of this is, of course, ego. And deadlifts are the same damn thing. A lot of people who have access to deadlift bars will use iron plates. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the more iron plates that you have on a deadlift bar, the more that it is going to bend, because iron plates are wider, they go out further to the collars. So the physics of the situation is that with the weight out further to the ends, the bar simply bends more. So you get people who are doing a shorter range of motion throughout all of their training on these iron plates versus using the kilo plates at the meet, which are thinner and will cause the bar to bend less. And this is, of course, a double whammy for people who are using commercial gym bars in combination with iron plates, who then don't even go to a meet with a deadlift bar, but let's say they go to an IPF meet with a stiff 29mm Eleiko bar, and the bar does not bend at all. It has almost no give whatsoever with those kilo plates and the stiff bar. And they're getting a way longer range of motion, and all of a sudden they can't deadlift within 30 to 40 pounds of what they thought they could based on their training. And this all comes down to, of course, not upholding the competition standard. So, the number one thing in my experience that you can do to perform more reliably at your meets is to be ruthless about training to the competition standard. You want to get to the point where you're erring on the side of being a little bit too strict with how you're upholding the standard, so that when you get to a meet, it's at the point where, if anything, the conditions are slightly easier than what was happening in your training. Or at the very worst, they're equal, so that you have a good and accurate set of data from which to base your attempts on at the meet. You're not basing your bench press attempts on a bench press that was done on a Forza bench that is 1 to 2 inches taller, with your butt an inch off of the bench with a quick pause, thinking that you're going to be able to bench the same numbers with a US APL IPF pause length, your butt firmly planted, and of course with that shorter bench. So again, the number one thing you guys can do, in my experience and my opinion, to improve the reliability of your performance at a meet is to do everything you can, equipment-wise and technique-wise, to uphold the competition standard. Do what you're going to do at the meet in your training, and I guarantee you'll start having more 7 for 9, 8 for 9, 9 for 9 type of meets. As always, my friends, good luck with your training and have a nice day. Peace.